Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Uwchlan Township Board of Supervisors workshop meeting for the month of March. Today is the 5th. And just a note for everyone, we are live streaming this meeting on our township's YouTube channel, and it will be recorded. Go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we will jump right into our business agenda for today, starting off with a discussion on industrial.
Good afternoon, everybody. We had previously talked about an ordinance specific to warehouses, and we got some feedback from folks in that industry, as well as looking at some other model ordinances, as well as some of the trending land use changes out there, and thought that we might be better served by doing a broader industrial uses ordinance, which addresses, among other things, warehouses and data centers. And so we put together a draft ordinance that we were hoping to kind of talk through today. We have Pico is here today to talk about specifically around data centers and just kind of understanding them and their impact on the electric grid for us to kind of take into account and consideration. We did invite Aqua. I think they're coming, and hopefully they'll be able to come to also talk about water impacts. So we thought we'd kind of walk through this draft ordinance and have some dialogue around it. And then as we start getting into some of the data center elements and power, we'll ask Pico. They've got a great presentation to talk about for us to think about and consider, and kind of go from there. We have Matt Kosich from Bowman, our traffic engineer, is here. I think Dan Daly, our township engineer, is coming. And so as we kind of walk through this, we want to have lots of dialogue and workshop this, so to speak. So as we kind of laid out, the purpose and intent is really to modernize and strengthen the regulation of industrial uses within the township. And our goals really are to protect the public health, safety, and welfare from adverse land use impacts, implement the goals and policies of the township's comprehensive plan, make sure that we're directing development in areas appropriate for that particular land use. We're addressing environmental, traffic, noise, visual impacts, and really differentiating. One of the things that we had heard and we took note of in some of the model ordinances is really differentiating between the different kinds of uses and their impacts, and really looking at this more from an impact perspective as opposed to a land use perspective. The ordinance would be applicable to any new industrial uses coming in, and then we also include expansions of existing industrial uses and any substantial change in operation occurring after the ordinance is approved. And we include a definition of what substantial change in operation would be, and that's an increase of more than 20% in the building floor area devoted to the industrial use, a change from general warehousing to fulfillment, logistics, or high turnover distribution operations, the addition of overnight operations where none had previously existed.
Can I stop you there for a second? On that one, I think where none previously existed is a little broad in the sense that someone could say, 100 years ago, there used to be I would say where none currently exists.
Okay. Where there's an increase in truck trips, more than 20% of those that had been documented in the most recent approved traffic study, or a change in tenant that results in a materially different operational profile. We get into a variety of definitions. I'm not going to walk through them each individually, but I think the ones that are important to call out are the definitions of a small logistics facility, a large logistics facility, and a high impact logistics facility. So again, we more looked at this in terms of what the impact might be. So a small logistics facility being a facility containing 40,000 square feet or less of gross floor area and generating fewer than 50 tractor trailer trips in a 24-hour period. And you know, when you really look at that, you're thinking of like a Pickering Creek Industrial Park. You know, the impact, while there's some impact from it, relatively speaking, it's a low impact facility. A large logistics facility where it's really exceeding 40,000 square feet of gross floor area is projected to generate 50 or more tractor trailer trips in a 24-hour period. And then a high impact logistics facility is any large logistics facility that's 100,000 square feet or more of gross floor area, or it incorporates 10 or more tractor trailer loading docks. And we were having some conversation around that even this morning, or is projected to generate 100 or more tractor trailer trips in a 24-hour period. So there's a bunch of ors in there for a large logistics facility to be considered a high impact facility. It would need any one of those three to kind of qualify.
Would any of the Pickering Valley qualify as high impact?
At this point, no. I believe they're all under 40 square feet.
Okay, okay. I thought some were a little larger than that. Okay, thank you.
So my on the definitions, this is not specifically related on just industrial use. I see you had data storage, and when I look at data centers, it includes storage, processing, and transmission. So you probably want to have all three of those in the industrial use definition.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We do have somebody in the space here today, and like, you know, Andy, if I can put you on the spot a little bit, you know, we have 10 or more tractor trailer loading docks. From your perspective, like, is that from an impact? Like, is that a good number? Should it be higher? Should it be lower?
It's not the same number. Each user, the building would be oriented differently. It depends on the determined. On the exhaust side. Usually preference is more dock the better. Either move on to
Okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, speaking of, I mean, I don't know anything, but 10 seemed a little bit low for me to thinking about the difference between, you know, large logistics and then the high impact. But at the same time, I don't mind it being a little lower if that brings, you know, I don't know if it's excessively low. We might want to think about it a little bit more, but
We were trying to evaluate building size with the number of loading docks.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard just without knowing the use. I think the one building we were looking at was almost 90,000 square feet and had 14 loading docks proposed.
yeah. But that would already, well, 90,000 would. I mean, there's other things that could potentially kick that into high
I think
impact.
it depends on the use.
Yeah.
And just for visual reference, as far as what we already have existing in the township, I'm thinking of USSC. Where are they fitting into these definitions, just to kind of visualize the size and traffic impacts?
USSC, I believe they're over 100,000 square feet, but I don't believe they have more than 10 loading docks. So I think size-wise, they would be high impact. even though they may only have 2 or 3 loading docks.
Um, so I think those are the definitions that we really wanted to draw attention to. In terms of zoning districts and where they're allowed, small logistics facilities would be permitted by right in the planned industrial, commercial, and the planned commercial industrial districts. So PI, PIC, and PCID, which is where they're allowed today. The large impact facility or the large logistics facilities would be allowed through conditional use in those same 3 districts. And then the high impact logistics facility would be conditional use in PI and PIC. And then data centers would be permitted as conditional use in the 3 PI, PIC, and PCID districts.
Laura, do you want to raise your comment?
Yeah, I had just pointed out under 301 authorized districts B, it says industrial uses are expressly prohibited in all residential, agricultural, and non-industrial commercial districts. And just imagining that, for example, we have agricultural as a use within our zoning instead of as a district. So I'm not sure what that B section, how that would apply or.
I mean, we do have the RA, the Rural Agricultural District. Well, yeah, although as we go through the zoning ordinance task force, we're looking at combining the RA and RR districts. We're having conversations around that.
Well, I think if you have the RA though, then it probably makes sense to keep it.
To keep it in.
Yeah, I mean, we could just change that to be, industrial uses are expressly prohibited in all other districts.
I mean, and the intent of that is, I mean, I'm assuming someone could still apply for a variance? Or is the intent to essentially, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Getting into some of the dimensional and design standards, minimum lot area of 2 acres, minimum lot width of 200 feet, setbacks. And again, Tara, I think all of these are consistent with current setbacks. 40-yard front yard or 40 feet front yard, 15 side yard or 150 feet adjacent to an agricultural or residential zoning district, or lot containing an occupied dwelling, and same thing for the rear yard. In terms of building height, max building height of 35 feet, again, that's current. We do provide where they can go up to a maximum of 65 feet. However, the building has to be fully sprinklered, and for each foot above 35 feet, the maximum permitted building coverage and impervious coverage is reduced by 0.7% for each foot of building height. So as an example, if it's going to be a 50-foot building, the impervious coverage and max building coverage would be reduced by 10.5%.
And that was my comment actually, was to just put in there that, see examples or by way of examples, because you might get something between, and someone's going to come in and say, well, I'm at 42, do I get the 45?
Right.
I would just, yeah.
Rooftop mechanical equipment has to be fully screened from view at ground level. And then maximum impervious will comply with the underlying zoning district requirements.
Question about that section. I know in prior conditional use hearings for previous development plans, the board has elected to put a condition in requiring that the building be built to accommodate solar at some point in the future. Is that something that we could work into the ordinance, or is better served in the conditional use process?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
I'd rather just put it in here than have to revisit it every time.
I mean, the other way is if, once you have a solar ordinance, you could just, when you're amending that, you could just amend these provisions, but you could.
I would imagine we need to write it so that if it's not feasible, right, then we can't require it.
Well, I don't, was the question, could you require it or could you allow it?
I think it's still allowed.
I think in the conditional use, usually we require it to be built so that it can support solar.
Okay,
And if we were going to do that, I think we'd have to have an out clause where if it's not feasible, but we can, I think
or
we
they
can deal
could
with
get a
that.
variance.
Or they can get a variance.
But
We'll just think about it.
We'll wordsmith that.
Do you want to allow for like green roofs as a possibility? No. Or are you like stuck on solar?
I'm willing to discuss either. And like I said, I don't know if it's better suited through conditional use or in the ordinance directly, but you can certainly look into it and have.
Could there just be a provision about sustainability practices, which would cover all of that?
I think it depends if we want a requirement to them to do something or just for them to,
Whether it's
Fine.
required or permissible.
right. And I think if we don't have it in the ordinance, then the by right plans we don't have any say on.
Right.
So that's the advantage of having it something in the ordinance.
Yeah, so like a sustainability provision.
I mean, we can also look at maybe providing some incentives for doing those things.
Yeah.
Good idea.
And
I mean, the question is, do you want to hold this up while you work on that piece, or just have this go through and then you can amend it with, once along with renewable energy ordinance that you might be working on?
I mean, yeah, I guess just thinking out loud for a second, if we were to, reduce, so like right now for each foot above 35 feet, the impervious and max building coverage is reduced by 0.7. But then if we put an incentive in there that said, if you're putting solar on there or you're putting a green roof on there, maybe that 0.7 becomes 0.5. Some kind of incentive we can noodle that
Think
around.
about that, yeah.
On the enhanced buffer for high impact uses, high impact warehouses, logistics facilities, and data centers have a 300-foot setback from any residential zoning or lot containing a dwelling with the setback area used for landscape buffering. We want plantings to be of sufficient density and height so that the building is substantially screened from view from adjacent residential properties within 5 years of installation. And then we get into some of the performance standards for industrial uses. So on, traffic impact studies, we're requiring a traffic impact study. We cite the standard, the standard use of the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual or other methodology approved by our traffic engineer. We talk through, kind of all of the things that you would normally do as part of a traffic study, including projected levels of service and crash history and vehicle queuing, and that it can't worsen, it can't degrade the existing level of services or level of service standards established by the township. What else do we have in here? Any site condition requirements or PennDOT requirements, safety considerations that have to get accounted for. We include a post-occupancy traffic study within 12 months of when the site is being used at 85% of projected capacity. We were having some conversation about truck traffic shall be whether we have truck traffic shall be prohibited on residential streets, or truck traffic or truck access shall be designed to minimize impacts on residential streets. Talk about on-site queuing, no vehicle queuing on public roads, truck circulation plans. Matt, anything to talk about on that?
Letter B there about the post occupancy study. I commented this that way because if issue a certificate of occupancy, then maybe it only becomes 20 or 30 or 50% used, and they'll never have post occupancy study, or which might probably be okay because you will not have an impact. Getting to 100% of capacity is, who knows when that would be. So that 85% number was just a suggestion. It's not based on any, data or anything. And that it could take a while after. Maybe it takes more than 12 months after the COs. So that's why I changed, suggest that. And comment on. No, maybe that was it.
So on that 85%, because I do think that's a little high. When I'm thinking of what is it? The one what's that? Yeah. That we might, if they get a tenant in there now, they're going to be nowhere near the 85%, but we might start seeing results that would predict what it could look like if it was fully built out. Well before that, I don't worry about what the one building, but say if they had two buildings on there, we might already know that third building is going to be a disaster or not. Like we would be able to determine that from the traffic flow from like at 65% or something like that. So I just like maybe 85% might be a little high.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a guessing game in the sense of, well, if I'm saying that 50% is a mess, traffic study is totally wrong, and at 50% things are a mess, then they're not going to have to do that study until they get to the higher.
Right.
But I guess if vice versa, or the contrary to that, if at 70% everything's fine,
Yeah.
and they do the study, but then you get to 80 or 90%,
Yeah.
it really starts to become a problem. Then
you've already done it. Yeah. That's a good
point. I mean, maybe we could say 50% at 85%. Something to think about.
Yes.
Or even some kind of additional verbiage that indicates if there's warning signs that there's a problem, it could trigger an earlier review.
Yeah,
or
that's
something
what I
like
was
that.
thinking. If there's some way to word it where it's at 50, 75, whatever the percentage may be, or in the event of a disruptive occurrence,
Yeah.
whichever comes first.
Traffic engineer, the site is having substantially negative impacts.
Because I can imagine a situation where it's not necessarily a mess, and I use that word, but maybe it's like, you have 50% occupancy, but you're using 80% capacity in your traffic. You could probably predict that even if it's flowing okay, when you go to that 75%, 85%, you're going to be well past what you were, predicting from that. Or some kind of, you can play with the numbers that way. But that's just what I'm thinking, that I don't know if I necessarily want to wait for 85%, especially if something like Portman might not reach 85% for a decade. So.
Yeah. How about if
Yeah, play around with that. Yeah.
massage the language, so we can all of us, and maybe a little options.
I have a general question. Under just the basic traffic study parameters, it says study shall evaluate existing conditions, background growth conditions, and projected future conditions with and without the proposed use. Can you talk just in generalities, because we have properties that have approved plans and are in various stages of construction and whatnot, kind of how you approach a traffic study and envision approved but not built uses when you're looking at a secondary approval?
Yeah, anytime studies are done, engineers pull from whatever's been approved at the township level already, we take that into consideration. Counts are done to examine the base condition today. And if we know that a previous warehouse, shopping center, whatever it was, let's say recently approved, engineer would take that traffic study, add that projected traffic from that yet to be built site into the base condition. To account for.
Yeah, I mean, I just ask because I know that there's often a lot of questions from the public regarding how a traffic study was conducted and how they could possibly know, for use that's not being used yet. Another comment that I know I have personally heard a couple times from people in the public is based on like what the capacity of a road is. Like someone will say Route 100 is at capacity. It can't fit one more car, So and this, I'm veering off course a little bit, but I just know that these are the types of comments we hear when we're looking at. So like, how do you, as an engineer, like define the capacity of a road? Is there ever a point where you say, absolutely not, this road is full?
Yeah. Long history of data from many studies across the country, many years with the Institute of Transportation Engineering documents, all that stuff. And as well as the Transportation Research Board produces a document called Highway Capacity Management. And there's been versions of that updated. I forget what the current version is, but it's been around since maybe the 60s. I forget, and it gets updated every 5 years. Current standards. And there are capacity standards for freeways, local roads, or signalized intersections, stop control intersections. And so we as engineers know all those numbers, and the analysis software that we use incorporates those standards. So not to get too detailed, just get a traffic signal, one lane. We look at it like you're given 100% green time at this traffic signal. How many cars can you get? Well, it's typically around 17, 18, 1900 cars. So we look at numbers like that. The pace, depending on the topography and the grades, lane widths, pretty heavy percentage of heavy vehicles, all that stuff is try to come up with our best guess. To answer your question about, so there's base condition you look at, existing traffic, you add on proposed developments built yet, and then you have the background growth rate that PennDOT actually issues annually. That can be used, and it's broken up into different regions around the state. So, since COVID, it's been pretty low, say less than so then you add on, then you say, okay, we're going to project 5 years out, use that growth rate. So here's what traffic would be out of this development in 5 years. And then you say, okay, what's this development generate? Traffic is this development generated. We add that traffic on top of the base, and then we analyze it again to see how it works. So you analyze the base condition, future without the development condition, see like, okay, it's level service B now, background growth, it's going to be a level service C, maybe it's going to. And then when you add on the site traffic, it's still a level service C, level service D, whatever. So that's the basic process. Does that make sense? You compare the build out scenario with non-build, and that's exactly what the development has to be.
No, that's very helpful. I hear that comment a lot, so I'm trying
I have
to.
another question then, as a follow-up to that, and you may not know the answer, but what's the accuracy rate of those projections?
I don't remember. We like to joke off in our room in our office, in a separate room with a crystal ball. You know, we'll go in there and we come out with the answers, but
I'm just curious.
yeah, it varies, you know, it varies. I mean, I think, and that's why, and frankly, years ago, post-occupancy, post-development studies weren't done. But I think all learners, that it's important to do that, require them. Because of that question, how accurate is this?
I'm just wondering, is it like, oh, it's gonna rain tomorrow?
Yeah.
It may or may not.
Traffic.
I'm definitely going to check out the highway capacity manual, but as far as background growth conditions and the factors that they take into that, I mean, for example, in Uwchlan Township, I think I already know the answer to this, but if we're looking at a development, is it taking into consideration, for example, growth in West Whiteland Township and approval for 2,000 residential unit? Like, I'm just wondering how granular it really gets at a community level.
You know, I would say typically no, but it's not always no. And really, the answer to that question is, what do you want the applicant to look at? You know, what do we want as traffic engineers? You know, you as the supervisors, et cetera. Hey, we know that new apartment complex is coming in right across the border. You have to do that in your guides. You know, typically I'll say the radius influence, so to speak, of the development, it dissipates fairly quickly. You know, like when you get beyond a mile or two or whatever, the effect of that development on the traffic signal that's a mile and a half away is typically not all that great because there are lots of different things. But all that stuff is, there's certainly a level of subjectivity which should be included in the traffic study.
Yeah.
Things like that can be used.
Thank you. One follow-up comment, just to be, as far as the post-occupancy traffic study, what recourse does the township have, for example, if a post-occupancy travel study is completed and it shows unsatisfactory results? Because I feel like that's the conversation we end up. We're like, okay, we did it and we found out everything is terrible, and now who's going to fix it and who's responsible? And so, I mean, I don't know that that is something that gets built into an ordinance, but just how do we avoid being in a situation where we know we have a problem and we've documented the problem? And
I mean, it could be part of the development agreement. It could be part of the ordinance. I mean, you could make provisions for that.
I was going to say, if as part of that sentence, we just add a requirement that, you know, if it's
Under paragraph I, the threshold verification, it does reference the very last, the beginning, impactful post occupancy, the bottom of the page there. The impactful post occupancy trips, see objections, 150% taxpayer project. So I think that's essentially the standard you're asking. It's exactly the right language.
okay,
Which section were you looking at?
At the bottom of the page, it's in volume I, so Dave scroll down at the very bottom, section 501.
It goes on to the next page.
No, I don't.
Goes over, yeah.
I don't have enough.
on bottom.
Oh, okay.
Bottom.
Okay. I didn't realize it.
I just know we find ourselves in situations where we
Yeah.
have a remedial study done and we're like, oh, there is a problem, and then it's like,
Well,
okay,
yeah,
yep,
no point to any study if you're not.
right.
Right, yeah, no, that makes sense.
I got you.
maybe we can work on taking some of that language and incorporating it also in post-occupancy
Into that
traffic
same
study,
section.
just a belts and suspenders kind of thing.
Right. I think that's all I have for now.
In terms of noise, have to comply with the township noise ordinance. All measurements are taken at the property line of the receiving use. Measurements are taken during worst case operating conditions. We have outdoor loading, unloading shall occur only between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. unless otherwise approved. Equipment and generator testing, we put limits on that between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. We have something in there where noise mitigation measures can be required. There has to be a sound or noise study that applicants have to submit. And for data centers and high impact logistics facilities, post-construction verification study has to be completed within 6 months of commencement of operations. And then specifically around data centers, we have mechanical noise where mechanical equipment associated with the data center, including but not limited to cooling equipment, exterior mechanical equipment, and generator enclosures, can't exceed 50 decibels at the property line. And low frequency tonal noise has to be specifically evaluated in that noise study to account for vibrations and different noise that hums and stuff that data centers may produce. In terms of environmental protections, it's a lot of what's already there in terms of complying with DEP air quality requirements, woodland protection standards, idling of diesel vehicles have to comply with DEP requirements, riparian buffer protections, and then we get into air quality and emissions documentation where the applicant has to identify all federal and state air quality permits that may be required for the facility, and then share information about the permit status or determination letters, hours, estimated annual operating hours, combustion equipment, emission control technologies, and then fuel storage and spill prevention measures.
So just go back to well, it's not exactly noise, but I remember when Lorena was going through, and I know that's not an industrial, wouldn't fall under this, but noise was always a complaint, but vibration was a big complaint. And we tried to capture it under the noise, but it's not exactly the same. And I remember feeling it like it was very uncomfortable in a couple of times. Maybe we can include a section on vibration. I can't think of any uses that would cause that, but since we're going to do this, might as well capture that.
Yeah, and we can talk.
Someone puts in like a mile-long centrifuge or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
No, we can absolutely look at including something around that. And now energy and utilities. And this might be a good time for Pico to share their presentation and pull that up. Pass the mic.
Hi, I'm Tom Bonner. I'm Director of Policy and External Affairs at PICO, and here with my colleague Glenn Murphy. Glenn, you want?
Sure. My name is Glenn Murphy. I'm Senior Manager Economic Development at PICO. Nice to meet you all.
I'm just going to give a brief starting point, and please feel free to interrupt and let us know if we're kind of hitting the target of what you're interested in. We can do this presentation in 45 minutes. We can do it in 15. We'll try to do the 15-minute version, but feel free to answer questions if you see something that you'd like more information on. And our goal as PICO is just to be here for educational purposes. We have a regulatory obligation to serve all customers who apply for service the same, so we don't differentiate among customers. We don't say that's a good use, that's a bad use. However, we recognize in the case of data centers, because of the infrastructure investment necessary to serve them, we have had to institute some unique procedures. Glenn is the expert on those things, but the goal is to ensure that costs are not shifted onto other customers, nor do we have stranded costs where we make investments into the system that the future revenues were intended to offset, and those revenues never occur. So really looking to protect our customers in both regards. And with that, I will turn things over to Glenn.
Is this working? Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Just to start off, what is a data center? If you're curious what it looks like on the inside of a building, on the outside of the building, you'd probably never know. Looks like just any other building that's out there. But on the inside, it's full of equipment that looks like this: rows and rows, floors and floors of server equipment, networking equipment, cooling equipment, and this, it's just every floor and rows and rows and rows of this. And that's the traditional data centers. There's probably data centers all throughout this area that you don't even know about. Just a regular building and used for cloud computing or things of that nature. And what I think we're seeing the big change in, what we're seeing a lot of energy behind, is what we call them the hyperscalers, or the AI data centers. And they look a little bit different on the outside. They look like very large warehouses. But again, on the inside, they look something like this. And, just to give you some idea, what's it used for? Cloud computing, AI, machine learning, the Internet of Things, everything from remote work to streaming, gaming, and social media. So, it's, everyone kind of wonders, well, where's all this go? What do we need these data centers for? They're the backbone of all the information that we're all using every single day for our work, for our play, and for social media. So we jump to the next slide. Great. So why is there so much growth in this service area? I can tell you from my position, it's been over the last 12 to 18 months. We've just seen numerous applications for what I would call the AI data centers. There's a lot of things going for this area as compared to maybe other areas of the country. One of the big things that people, don't think about is, well, why is this actually the weather? I know we've had a lot of snow this year, but in comparison to other areas of the country, it's a pretty mild weather pattern as compared to other places. The other thing is, did I jump ahead? Two. We switched the order. Apologies. Yeah, great. There also is an abundant fiber infrastructure in this area, so that's also attractive. And there are some tax incentives. So you can see that, the governor passed in 2021 some tax incentives to incent, data centers to come here. And we also have a resilient and a wide-ranging workforce in this area. You think about all the universities in this area, all the tech schools, everything from constructing the data centers to working at them. We have the resources here. And when we think about data centers, I think the misnomer is when we think about cloud computing, there aren't that many people working those type of buildings. When we talk about the AI data centers, there are many people who work at them, several hundred to 1,000, depending upon the size of the data center. And those are typically high-paying IT jobs. So it's a little bit different than what I think we've seen 10, 15 years ago in terms of what kind of workforces and what kind of impact they're going to have for job creation. I apologize for jumping over you, Tom. We'll go backwards too, because that was my fault. We rearranged these slides yesterday, and I still got my brain working. We go back one more, because I think it talked about what we're seeing in terms of activity in the PICO service territory. And right now we have over 20 projects. And that doesn't sound like a big number, but when you think about the amount of energy they need, it's a very large number. And it comes in at anywhere from, say, 100 megawatts up to a gigawatt. Now, what does that mean? What does a gigawatt mean to anybody? I know in my world it makes sense, but maybe not everybody else. I'm going to jump to the next slide and then jump back to this one to demonstrate the point. When we think about half a gigawatt, it's equivalent to about 415,000 homes. So I have applications right now anywhere from 100 megawatts, which would be 1/5 of that, all the way up to 1 gigawatt, which would be twice as much as that. So we think about it, it's 450,000 homes. It's about 100 hospitals. or 20 research universities, or maybe 35 manufacturing plants. So they're looking for a lot of energy, and the challenge is really on us as utilities to try to bring that much power to them to serve their loads. And I apologize for making you jump all over. Can you jump back? So there's a lot of infrastructure and planning that's associated with these, as you might imagine. And when we think about data centers and the impact of what I just said, a gigawatt of power, that's a lot of power. And we need to do extensive studies to try to figure out what do we need to do in order to bring that much power into the area. And that goes not just inside the PICO territory, but it goes outside the PICO territory as well, because the impact could be so large. A few other data points here. When we think about the growth of data centers over the next few years, you can see that it doubles, triples, or even quadruples all the way up through the 2030s from where we are right now. And we're looking at in the state of Pennsylvania, that number I think is a little bit low. It's $90 billion is what's written there for what we expect to be the investment in Pennsylvania. From what I'm seeing, that number might be low. It might be even higher than that. There's one data center that's in Falls Township that we estimate that's going to be $10 to $20 billion of investment just for one in that particular case. Obviously, you have the rest of the state to go. We can jump on to the next slide. We just covered that, and I'll turn it over to Don.
So sometimes we get questions. We've had one community asked us, well, why can't you get this data center connected tomorrow? Why does it take so long? Why is the grid, everybody's probably seen stories about how our antiquated grid can't handle data centers. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. And you need to, all these things are interrelated, but you need to break them up into their component parts. So the first thing is the generation, just the volume of electrons that you need to run these facilities. So data centers, as Glenn was talking about, require a huge amount of electricity. Not only do they require a huge amount of electricity, but they pretty much run 24/7. They do have some peak load need during those warmest summer hours because you need to keep the equipment cool. It's about a 20% increase in what they would run at at their normal level during those cooling hours, but they need very high levels of reliability and resiliency. Ideally, they'd like to be located close to generation, just that helps with reliability. There was a lot of talk probably 2 years ago about data centers being entirely off the grid or locating behind the meter. In fact, almost all data centers, pretty much all that we're aware of, they do want to be connected to the grid. They need the backup. They need the reliability. They want to have alternative sources of power, even if they are looking at providing some of their power behind the meter. Under Pennsylvania law, all of these data centers are buying their energy on the market. So PICO offers our customers who don't choose a supplier what's called default service, where we buy power on their behalf. That does not apply to data centers. They're out there securing their own power. We don't have any say in where they are getting that power. On the transmission side, this is the biggest impact for us. Every project has to be run through both our internal processes and PJM's process after we look at it to make sure that it is not negatively impacting reliability. It's not exposing the system to blackouts or brownouts, interruptions, and it pretty much in all cases requires significant investment in the grid to connect data centers. They do like to locate in places where ideally it is going to be the least costly, but there's no place on our grid where we just have sitting around 500 megawatts of power. That doesn't exist. As a utility, we don't build it and they will come. We build it only once we know that usage is going to be there. That's a critical consumer protection so that we are not over investing and everyone having to pay for it.
When you say you know they'll come, is that based, like they have to have window from township before you can build it, or like would they be able to get a bill surcharge?
We need a contract in order for us to start construction. I can talk about the wills. Maybe we should just jump right to it.
Yeah, why don't you?
In the past, like when I had a hospital that wanted to build and they wanted to get more financing purposes, they would often ask for what's called a will serve letter. Basically, is a letter from PICO saying that we agree we will serve you. But in all honesty, the will serve letters aren't worth that much because as a utility, by law, we are obligated to serve. If someone asks us, we have to serve you. What we don't know is how much it's going to cost and when I'm going to be able to deliver to you. So the will serve, sure, I'm going to serve you, but I can't tell you when. It could be 2040, it could be 2030. I don't know. And I don't know how much it's going to cost. So when Tom is talking about, hey, we're going to build once we know that load is going to be there, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, and I can get into more detail. Basically, we look for a contract. There's a contract that we call a transmission security agreement. And what that does is it requires a security to guarantee us that if the load doesn't show up, let's suppose the hyperscaler decides, hey, I'm not going to show up, or I'm not going to use as much energy as what I told you to build to, we can execute on a letter of credit that will be required in order to make up the revenue that should have been realized if they had hit the load curves that they asked us to do.
Is that a current requirement or is that something you're looking to implement?
No, we do. We actually implemented it already. So it's something that
Just for data centers? Or?
just for large loads.
Large
So when we
loads.
think about PICO and what we do, we're not here to say, hey, a data center or this, because it's the same thing to us. It's how much load is it and what kind of risk does that create for us in terms of construction. So whether if it was a very large manufacturer, if it was a data center, the same rules would apply. I still need to know that you're going to show up with the load that you're going to have. So that way I can protect all the other customers from the fact that I don't want to build something and then nobody uses it and everybody else has to pay for it.
So would you suggest that a municipality in doing a land development, instead of just requiring a will serve letter, actually mandates that there be a financing agreement in place?
This gets a little dicey, and I think we're going to have to work together because as we read through this, I noticed that it said, hey, proving that we have capacity. As Tom said earlier, we don't have capacity for 1 gigawatt. We have to build it. So what's the next best thing? It probably is the contract. And I know, Tom, you did a good job. We talked about it earlier. You want to go through the questions that may be applicable?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. Number one, the procedures that Glenn mentioned, those kick in at projects of 50 megawatts or more. That is consistent with the line that the Pennsylvania PUC has proposed, and they're currently doing a model tariff for large load customers. So it has to. These rules are applicable at 50 gigawatts or more. The second question on the will serve letter, or how do we know this is real? What we recommended to another township was there really 4 stages in the process. Number one is the customer filing its application with PICO to enter our cluster process. So the cluster process, Glenn will talk about some more. It's where all the projects that come in kind of an open season get lumped together. We study them at once and assess the need there. So one, have to apply for PICO's cluster process, and you provide your deposit. It's actually $1 million that we require. So they will go into the cluster. We then do the analysis. Some months later, we will come back with the results of that cluster study. You can ask the customer, have you received a transmission security agreement from PICO? Within, we hope, about a month after that, the customer will have to decide if they're going to accept that transmission security agreement and send us back a signed TSA. If you want to ask them, do you have a signed TSA in place? That is a reasonable thing to ask them.
Yeah.
And then the last step would be, when is the date of service or estimated date of service that PICO has given you? If you ask those questions, you will have a pretty good roadmap for how the project is moving through PICO's process.
Thank you.
If I can add just a little bit more to that, I think timing is something that people don't always understand. These projects are so large. As Tom mentioned, there's an application process. It's a window of time where everybody can apply. And then there's a study period. The study period can take 6 months or maybe a little bit longer. So when we're thinking about, permits and things of that nature, keep in mind that they might not know all the answers because we as PICO don't know all the answers because of the timeframes that I just put together right there. Then when we talk about construction, actually providing that service to these customers, in some cases it's 2028, in some cases it's 2033, in other cases it's even further. depends upon a lot of different factors, but that is also something I just wanted to make sure you understood as you're thinking about this. There's a process that takes many, many months. I saw a mention of 12 months in here. You know, is that long enough? Maybe my advice, maybe a little bit longer, because if we start at the beginning of the window for the cluster process, that could be 6 months before the study even starts. Then we got 6 months for the study, and then you got some time period to negotiate the contract. So just, FYI, and then the service period of construction, that can take us out into the 2030s, depending upon what the situation is.
To pick up, I'm sure you get questions if you have applications for data centers, is this going to drive up my rates? We'll talk about that a little bit more, but the way most of the investment happens on the transmission side of the system, and that is recovered over time from the customers. They're using a lot of electricity. They'd be paying us a lot of money every year for their use of the grid. On the distribution side, really the very last step in the process where the customer is plugging in, they may have some switch gear, they will have metering. Usually the lowest cost in the process, the customer has to pay us up front for the distribution costs. So there's no risk there of those stranded costs or cost shifting, because that all has to be borne by the customer up front. So I'm going to try and do the next 3 slides in about 15 seconds each. Generation. It's putting an enormous amount of pressure. There's an enormous need for new generation to be built, driven by data centers. So we had flat electric load for really very, very minimal growth over the last 20 years since the Great Recession. That is, we're seeing like triple the rate of growth. And there is a lot of uncertainty about how much will be needed, just because nobody knows how many of these projects can make it through, how many can get connected, how many are actually going to get financed. But whatever the result, it's going to be a lot more than we need now. So the next slide, on the transmission side, it's also driving enormous need for new investment in the transmission system. So this year and the next 4 nationwide, you're going to have as much transmission investment as you saw in the previous 10 years. Data centers, again, being the biggest driver for that. They're not the only reason you need to invest in the transmission system. There is routine growth. There are parts of the transmission system that are 100 years old that are overdue for replacement. So sometimes when we identify the need for a transmission project as part of connecting a data center, it's really beneficial, because we were going to have to go do that work anyway. And the sooner we can do it, the better. So next slide. And the last thing mentioned, not a lot of distribution need. What you do run into at both the transmission and distribution level is there's a global supply chain challenge still for this high capacity electric infrastructure equipment, the transformers, the switch gears, the substation equipment, all of that. So that is a contributing factor to the time involved in connecting data center customers. So I think Glenn has discussed a lot of the data center, the cluster growth.
You told me if I went too long. Talked about what we call the cluster study. So just imagine, we're getting approached by many, many customers for these very large hyperscale projects. We've developed a cluster process which has an open window for an application period. It's usually every 6 months. Customers apply and we analyze all their loads together. That's going to sound a little crazy to folks, but when we think about this project, and we've been growing with it, we got approached by the first project. Maybe Laura has a data center. She comes to us, Pico, I have a 500 megawatt data center I want to build. And then Bill comes to us and Mark, and they all want the same thing. They want different data centers. We were analyzing them at the time. And then what happened, we could learn, is as we told Laura and Bill and Mark what the costs would be and what the timing of the projects would be, we found as soon as Laura signed her contract, it changed the dynamic for Bill and for Mark, because she used in her project the infrastructure that was already existing. Now we have to build more infrastructure to supply these. So we came up with, it's an industry standard. We learned from our friends in Dominion, who have it's called the data center capital of the world in Northern Virginia, that the cluster process is the best process, where everything comes together give me your application. We study the whole system together. We understand what the, the ins and outs are, what the timing will be, what costs will be, and then we can come back to you with the transmission security agreements to make sure that, hey, you're serious about the project and that you're going to sign what's called a letter of credit, which we can execute if, God forbid, we built all these facilities and your load did not show up. As Tom mentioned earlier, the application process is $1 million fee. That's the deposit in order for us to study these loads. We ask for a site plan. We ask for what's the usage, what's the load ramp to make sure again that the project is serious. And then we get into the cluster study. Once they sign the transmission security agreement, they're locked in and we're locked in to construct.
When, typically, where in the development process from a locality, local municipality process, where are they when they come to you with a cluster?
Where are they with I think it's varying cases. And I think it's varying because there's different ordinances in different areas. And I think municipalities are learning as we're going to. Some of them what we're doing here, the first one that comes into a township, okay, what do we do with this one? Okay, and now we're getting better and better. We're getting better at processing these things. And I think, municipalities are doing the same thing. So I think we're learning together, but to answer your question directly, we've gotten all kinds. Some that haven't started the process, some that have. And what we're doing is we're putting the onus upon them by, if they're going to sign a letter of credit for $100 million, they pretty much have to have their ducks in a row with the townships to make sure that they're able to build.
So I was thinking about, getting a letter from them before we even approve something, but then they need to have something approved for them to feel comfortable putting. It sounds like it's a chicken and egg.
Well, I
essentially.
mean,
I agree.
you can do, particularly if it's a preliminary approval type of situation, as part of the preliminary approval, it can be conditioned on them getting their agreement in place before they can get final.
I'm just, I'm not even thinking about whether or not.
That's probably
just
the best
more
way to do it,
curious.
conditional.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. So I went through this one pretty quickly. We'll go to the next one.
So I've heard this other issue, I don't know if but it's something I'd never thought about, that some of the generators are starting to see issues where the facility shut down and then there's a surge of power. Has that been an
We
issue?
have not seen, so we worked with Dominion. Again, Dominion, call it, they're 10 years ahead of us with
Right.
developing these data centers. And we asked them, we had our engineers work with them. We haven't seen anything that scared us or caused us any agita. What I think that refers to is if you have like a gigawatt data center, they can drop 20 megawatts and then come back up again. That sounds like a substantial load. That's a very large hospital, right? But in terms of their entire load, it's a small percentage. And when we think about what we're feeding these customers with, they're not feeding like this building right here. I'm guessing it's probably 480 volts. When we're talking about these data centers, we're feeding them with 500,000 volts. We're talking about substantial systems that can take the ups and downs because that's what they're designed to do. We're 230,000 volt systems. We don't feed them with 33,000 volts or even 69,000 volts. We feed them with the highest because that's what it requires.
So one thing that our leadership team asked us to do is they said, we know we're going to get questions from customers about how this is going to affect my bill. So can you go ahead and do some cost benefit modeling? So what we did is, one, we started from the premise of, we support policies that ensure that data centers are not shifting costs to other customers. That was our starting point. And what we looked at is this first group of customers that had applied for large projects in our first cluster. And Glenn, just because he wanted to be confusing, called it pre-cluster. But we said, what would be the cost once we had the numbers of the preliminary estimates of upgrading service and upgrading the transmission system to serve these customers versus the revenues they would bring in? The way we operate as a utility, we have what's called a revenue requirement. These are the costs of operating the system, and then you effectively divide it among all of your customers. So we said, what would be the contribution of these data centers toward our revenue requirement? And would that on net be positive, be favorable or unfavorable for the rest of our customers? The good news is utility rates are designed to allocate costs, fairly among all customers at the beginning. So that's your starting point. What we found when we looked at these costs is The impact, we used residential customers as the simple proxy, would be neutral to modestly favorable. It all depends on, I mentioned earlier, you have some transmission things that you were going to do anyway that were already in your plans that needed to be replaced or upgraded. Some of those things go into the cost. You discount it. There's a lot of different ways you could, estimate it or slice it and dice it. But the worst case scenario, you're coming out about neutral. And then over time, as more of the investment is depreciated, you move to a modestly favorable because just the overall cost of operating the system are now being spread more broadly. So you have a lot more people and a lot more, load covering the common costs of operating the system. It's a little more complicated to try to, model for a large commercial customer, smaller commercial customer, because they're more varied in their usage. But in general, directionally, it's going to be the same. It should be neutral under the worst case scenario, and then trending toward modestly favorable. It's not going to make a huge impact either way on bills. What we do try to emphasize to people, sometimes folks say, well, we should put these data centers in their own separate rate category or own separate class. That would actually be really negative because you lose the positive impact of them especially on the distribution side of the rate, contributing and toward those common costs. You don't want to do that. It may be different for other utilities that have other rate structures, but at PECO, we've been trying to be pretty vocal about that. At least leave flexibility so everybody can do what works best for their customers. Now, when we say it is neutral in terms of cost, that is for the delivery side, the transmission distribution. There is no doubt the data centers are putting huge pressure on the generation, the supply side. Simple supply and demand, yes, they are putting upward pressure on rates. We need to get new generation built. We need to figure that out. We're not building enough new generation. We did not try to model that in our customer impacts. That's really outside of what PECO does. We didn't look at either other economic benefits. So you'll hear, data centers, we'll talk about the tax revenue. They're going to bring jobs and employment. We didn't look at that. We also didn't look on the other side of the equation on, community impacts or water or things that are outside our area of expertise. We just looked at the energy delivery side. And like I said, neutral to, modestly beneficial. And then the last thing, and I don't want to, go through these too much, but, for everyone else on the last slide, there are a lot of issues that we still need to be looking at, and we need to all be collectively wrestling to the ground. Number one, where are we going to get the generation to meet this need while ensuring that the average resident, the average business still has enough power and we're not, really negatively impacting affordability. We need solutions there. As Glenn talked about the cluster process. The really tricky thing is every utility is also going through this at the same time. And these projects are so big, they have impacts on each other and other company grids. So, and every time you make a change in the transmission system, you're resetting a new baseline, and you have to wait till one is done till you can do the next piece. So it's really tricky stuff. Let's see. We did talk about the transmission security agreements to protect against stranded costs. And one thing that we've not really seen, but it's a relevant issue, is what if you had a real outlier, a project where the cost of the transmission upgrades were going to far exceed, expectations of future revenues. Those edge cases, we're aware they could be out there in the future. I think we're kind of in the, we'll figure it out when we get there. But, that's something that policymakers definitely need to be looking at. And then, the last thing for environmental purposes, is this going to require a whole lot of new generation to be built? Absolutely. We know a lot of local governments, a lot of county governments have sustainability goals. Some have adopted like zero carbon goals. It is really hard, and it's a real challenge. And no one, when they passed a zero carbon by 2050 ordinance 2, 3, 4 years ago, envisioned electric demand increasing 4% a year. So that's something that I think everybody needs to kind of reset, figure out what is achievable. How do we make these two things fit together? We don't have all the answers here at PICO, but we do acknowledge the issue, and it's something we think about too.
Thank you. So I'm curious, when you see these projects coming in, like what, and not in so much in megawatt terms, but in physical terms of the size of these the land area, things like that. I mean, we're thinking about, we have certain areas that we don't have that much land here. Are we, likely to get someone looking at some of the properties near the turnpike, for instance? Is that too small for these data centers that you're saying?
They typically look for spaces where they can employ at least 100,000 square feet, more closer to 1,000,000 square feet.
Okay.
All right. And they usually are single story. They don't, stack on top of each other, separate buildings. The typical applications I'm seeing are for campuses that are at least 300 acres, but many of them are over 1,000 acres or more, where they have, ample space for this, for switchgear, and, even if they want backup generation as well.
Not typically densely populated areas. So not typically densely populated areas.
Typically not, but we got one in South Philly that is looking to do that type of thing. How congested that may be.
Imagine that has to be multi-story if it's in South Philly.
Now there's a very large 1,300 acre area that's just been remediated.
Oh.
If you remember where Sunoco refinery was,
Okay.
that's all been demolished. All the environmental work to remediate that area has been done. And they're looking at, strong manufacturing, creating a lot of jobs, and also potentially some data centers.
Yeah, the other example, this one is public and we can talk about this. Glenn referenced earlier Fairless Hills up in Bucks County, the old US Steel facility, which was, just this massive manufacturing complex. So for the same reason, these locations were appealing for uses in the past like that. They are now appealing for data centers.
You had mentioned when you talked about worst case scenario. What does that mean? Like, what is a worst case scenario?
You would need massive investment in transmission upgrades to make the project be able to pass the reliability requirements for both ourselves and PJM, and the revenues that would be brought in, because it was a comparatively smaller data center with comparatively smaller revenues coming in the future, would be out of whack. I think this should largely work itself out, because if it had that much transmission upgrade needed, it is probably going to be many, many years into the future until that project could be, built and interconnected. And if your size of your project is not so large, it's on the smaller side of the data centers, it's kind of hard to see the feasibility of that going forward.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we say we kind of need to see how this plays out and see if we encounter just an edge case where it just doesn't seem to make sense. And then if so, if the customer really wants it, again, we have an obligation to serve. We have to connect them, but then maybe we have to revisit some of our procedures and requirements.
Do you guys model or not even model, but have any kind of discussions about whether, if there's basically a backlash, withdrawal from from this push for data centers? For instance, say, I'm just thinking more of the fiber optics, when they went in and everyone was putting them in the ground, we're like, wait, we have too many. I'm thinking if there's like maybe only room in the market for one or two AI companies instead of, I can't even count right now. So, like, my point being, like, they're coming in with all these plans, they're building all of them. Do you guys have any sense of the reliability of that market staying? That might be outside of your
It's very tough to
range.
say. I'll just give you pure conjecture. So what I'm seeing is that Tom referenced the transmission system, and I referenced various years in which we have to do build outs going into the 2030s. That seems to be a deterrent for more data centers to come on. The early adopters in our first couple of clusters, first in, first to get served. The lawns later, it may be the case that their service dates are so late that this becomes an unattractive area for them to go, and they look for other areas that might be a little bit faster. So that being said, you know, I read a lot of articles. There are many articles that talk about that we're overshooting with AI, as you mentioned. You know, that and there's the same thing happened with the internet. The internet, we overshot, and then it went hit a low, and then it took off again, right? That seems to be the conventional wisdom here, is that there will be some companies that overshoot, and then it'll take a lull, and then it'll shoot back up again as people find more and more applications for AI.
This is a fiercely competitive industry, and customer applications with us are confidential information, you know, protected under confidentiality. So sometimes we get requests for information we just cannot give, and we'll work with you more like on those 4 questions where we can't release the information, but you can certainly ask the applicant for the information.
If we can go on that note, the one thing I'll throw out here is on 504 section D, there's a mention here, data centers. It says electrical infrastructure impact statement. Data center shall provide documentation from the utility confirming available capacity. That was your question earlier, Mark. But then it also says, and identifying any required off-site improvements. That would be difficult. The reason why is because we have the transmission system where many of these off-site upgrades would happen. An example I'll give you is just because a data center is maybe built here, there may be impacts to the grid that happen near Philadelphia or even further south. We do the studies to figure out where we need to make off, because the power flows may change throughout the transmission system. The transmission system, it's a highly guarded in terms of all the work that we do. You'd hate to take down a line for maintenance. If people find out that the other line is very crucial, they make bets on it in the financial markets, or there's nefarious activity. So it's considered to be critical electrical infrastructure information. It'd be very hard for us to tell the customers or the data centers that what we're going to be doing on the grid. Thus, it would be difficult for them to be able to provide you what's happening everywhere on the grid because of their project. The other thing I throw in here too is we're studying them as a cluster. It's very hard for us to break up what portions of the grid we're upgrading because of Bill's project versus Laura's, because they're all studied together. So that one I think would be hard to answer. They can talk about the local infrastructure improvements that would be needed, but the grid infrastructure improvements would be very difficult to answer.
I have a question. Just when you said nefarious, it brought this to mind. When looking at the physical infrastructure that has to be present in a plan for this type of activity, as well as whatever the given nature of that tenant is, what kind of risk is introduced to the community from like an emergency response standpoint? Like, are these considered critical infrastructure areas that might have heightened?
Yeah, and the reason I say it depends, because it depends upon what applications are being run inside them. So in some cases, they are running security or national security applications. In other cases, it may be for more social things that are not quite as critical. In some cases, the data centers or the AI data centers were built strictly for medical purpose. In other words, to find, to bring maybe a new pharmaceutical drug online, instead of 10 years, we can shorten it to maybe 2 because of all the learnings that we can do through AI. So it depends upon the application. And I'd say these things are so big, it's hard to sectional out. If I have a 1 gigawatt data center, they may be doing several different things in terms of, so it's very hard to say, well, this portion of it is for critical, this one isn't.
Right.
It's all the same lines coming in to feed the whole thing. So I'd say, unfortunately, we're delivering power to try to power these facilities. We can say less about what the ultimate nature would be. I would say the data centers themselves probably want to answer that question as you pose it to them.
And Claude's simultaneously bombing Iran and planting my garden. So it's not funny, but it's funny.
2 questions, maybe more. First, can you answer any generation questions, or not really? So you said more generation needs to be right? I mean, that's just a fact.
That's fact.
I guess I'm trying to understand my man, like, to serve the Pico territory, how far away can generation be built? And do we need to be thinking about or concerned, somebody trying to put a generation facility here in Uwchlan Township, or like, where are they looking to build generation facilities?
Okay, it's actually a great question. I skipped over that because I was going too fast on the presentation. So when we talk about, yes, the data centers are going to have upward pressure on rates, one of the things we do say to folks is it doesn't matter really if you say we're not going to put a data center in our township or in Southeast Pennsylvania or in Pennsylvania, because it's a regional energy market. It's 13 states and the District of Columbia, and really a power plant can go anywhere in there. And then there are going to be constraints on the transmission system, but for the most part, it's a regional system. One of the reasons that Pennsylvania is appealing to data center operators is we are a net power exporting state. We do have natural gas. We have, if nuclear is going to get, resuscitated in the US, there's a long history of nuclear power in Pennsylvania. You can handle a certain amount of this through, wind and solar. You'd almost certainly have to back it up with energy storage though, because like we talked about earlier, they need 24/7, energy capacity, and incremental sources are less valuable to data centers. Now they may go out and purchase renewable energy credits, to offset their usage. And I do say to my environmental friends, we're going to require a huge number of new clean megawatts just for the data centers to meet their state obligations under, it's called the Alternative Energy Standard, where they have to get credits for part of their usage through wind and solar or geothermal or such. So there is actually a huge opportunity for developing clean energy just so these data centers can meet their requirements. Does that help, Bobby?
Selfish perspective, as we're drafting the ordinance, has Pico considered, or are you willing to consider drafting some model ordinance language for municipalities to incorporate when addressing, zoning requirements and things like that?
I think our attorneys would probably advise no there. We can.
I know some of them. I agree with you.
We can put on paper those questions we talked about what are the stages in the process of the application of the data center, but beyond that, I would say no.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is, power is just one aspect of it. Water is another aspect of it, right?
Right.
Zoning is another aspect. There's many, many aspects. Power is getting all the limelight right now because it's the most important thing. It's the most scarce thing for all these hyperscalers to obtain. So, and as Tom said, we'd be overstepping a little bit to tell you how to do your job. We can certainly give you the information to help you do the best job that you can, but to step in, I think would be, we'd miss something that is only one piece of the puzzle, so to speak.
Yeah, I'll tell you, electric in this area, and water in this area is, because it's public water, it's probably not, any more difficult than electric, but you get into some of the rural areas where they're on, springs and individual water systems. It's a bigger issue, even.
Many ways to cool these.
Well, and that's the other thing I was going to ask is, are you seeing,
Yes.
there's better ways to cool the
Yep.
water but then
We're seeing the
You're
trend
seeing-
to use less and less water. So
Yeah.
they're looking at air cooled. There is some water usage. where it cuts
glycol,
down.
chemicals, other things.
There's another
Yeah.
one, the closed loop systems. So you're seeing these hyperscalers respond to the concerns by saying, you know what, okay, let's find a better way to cool these. On the flip side, those air cooled, they use more electricity. So, there's a little back and forth here.
This is really helpful.
Yes, thank you so
Very,
much.
very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate it.
A lot to think about.
My biggest takeaway is what you need to be asking an applicant for as far as assurance.
Yeah,
on the energy.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My head's spinning still on all that. I feel like now we need to make sure Aqua comes in to talk, but it's probably a lot that we didn't realize. In terms of water supply and cooling impacts, we really get into the fact that there needs to be an impact study prepared by a professional engineer or hydrologist, talking about where's the water coming from and estimated peak day demand and average daily demand, annual water consumption, the cooling methods, including water efficiency. One of the things we have in here is coordination and approval from the applicable River Basin Commission if there's certain withdrawal or consumptive use thresholds that are met. And then contingency plans in the event of a drought restrictions or water supply interruption. Lighting and visual impacts, I think, are pretty consistent with our existing ordinance.
Wait, can I stop you before you move on
yeah,
to that
sorry.
section? I just wanted to make two comments. The first has to do with the last question, just as far as like whether these are sites that are going to draw additional security risks. I think with Mariner, we got into this quite a bit as far as siting because the township had no authority over it. In this situation, are there situations where the zoning can make an impact on where these types of facilities are most appropriate? Is it next to a school? Is it in a residential area? That type of thing.
You're talking about for the energy generation or for the actual facility?
For the energy generation.
I think.
Well, I mean, whatever the degree of security risk calls for. I mean, I remember some specific lines of questioning during the Mariner East saga as far as homeland security risks because valve stations became a target of sorts,
And Pico, as you heard, is regulated by the PUC, the same as Sunoco was. And so you're going to have a lot of the same issues on the electric generation and distribution. But I don't think, at least not currently, unless they change the law, for the actual facility itself, I think that is obviously subject to zoning.
local zoning.
Well, and I wonder if the way to kind of thread that needle, in an earlier draft, we had like some language around sensitive receptors that included parks, playgrounds, schools, daycare facilities, et cetera. If we put something in there where there has to be, if there's on-site power generation, that has to be set back 300 feet, 500 feet.
I think that's right. My sense is that if it's on-site power generation, it's something that is subject to local zoning.
Right. And so just if there is going to be on-site power generation, that it's set back X number of feet from sensitive receptors.
It's already in here as being 300 feet from
Well, but
residential.
not right, but not like schools and parks and playgrounds and stuff like that.
Other public spaces that people are going to be gathering or exposed.
Well, what if that power included solar? I mean, that's not. To me, that doesn't seem like it necessarily requires a 300-foot setback for safety issues.
Well, and I think it depends on how it's being captured and stored.
Well, storage is different, but I'm talking about just the
Yeah.
generating. I mean, that's pretty passive. That's a pretty passive power generation. I mean, that's as passive as you get.
True, but I also feel like the size, I mean, the numbers that Pico was talking about there, like the size of the solar field,
Yeah.
have to be massive.
It wouldn't be, yeah.
be the whole
I understand.
township.
The 2.0 part of that question, as far as under A, we have an impact statement that requires power demand redundancy and emergency operations. Again, just do we have the first response capabilities within the township being served by a volunteer fire company to address the type of facilities that might be built and what their needs are in an emergency? I mean, I don't think that the taxpayers should have to buy 3 new fire trucks or whatever equipment it is that they need to appropriately and timely respond to an incident of that nature. Yep.
The other comment Bobby and I were talking about was requiring an emergency response plan for the data centers, because I don't even know that our first responders know how to deal with a data center.
If you had like a major fire, I mean, I don't know much, but I would imagine with electronics, it's going to produce some specific toxicities that I would want to.
Pico is always very timely when responding to. But right, those are all important considerations, and the ability of our volunteers to deal in the meantime. Where's that response coming from? Is it all that? As far as the water needs, I would love to have Aqua come. I think that they need to come and answer some of
This
these
was
questions.
really informative, but
Yeah, I agree.
the water supply side, yeah, that'd be really great.
As far as the agencies that would be involved in approvals for something like a water withdrawal or water sourcing on site, I know that we have the River Basin Commission. I assume DEP
Right.
would be involved in this.
They would. I mean, particularly if it's a surface withdrawal. Generally, groundwater is covered by the DRBC, at least, for the quantity issue. It's covered by the Delaware River Basin Commission. But there can be surface withdrawals. There was the very controversial proposal from Aqua back in the day to take surface water and put it into an old quarry and use that as a reservoir. And that was a DEP regulated issue.
So then my question would become, if we have complaints or water issues in that area, I mean, looking at some of the industrial and PIC areas in the township at the moment, there's well users in the vicinity. When complaints start rolling in, is it going to be Dan Daly? Who is going to be hurting all the agencies and following up on response? I mean, just another lesson learned.
Well,
from-
the interesting thing, you've also got the interplay, particularly when you're dealing with if people are using on-site wells. You have a lot of on-site wells in the township, or
near
Areas.
because
yeah.
that's going to be a county health department issue, right? They're going to start, and
I mean, yeah, I think that whole area, right, is on
And what
wells.
would be, as a homeowner with a private well, you're worried about what your impact is going to be. Does the developer have any responsibility to identify baseline conditions there? What happens when people, especially because we're talking about a township boundary and another township adjoining, what can we do to advocate for the people that are worried about their wells?
I think that's all of the big stuff in here. The only other thing that I would say is for large and high impact logistics facilities, they have to provide on-site facilities for truck drivers, restroom facilities, things like that.
so I had a couple, at least two, I think, relatively significant comments. One is with reference to the conditional use requirements. I'm assuming that this is in addition to section 611 and 806 that have the general standards. We should probably make that extract that this is in addition to that. And then there was one other. Then I also thought on the non-conforming uses, there's a general statement that basically non-conforming uses can't be expanded. I'm not sure that you may run into some problem with that. Generally, you have to provide for at least a reasonable expansion. I think you have a pretty good and pretty strict non-conforming use provision already. I think I might tie it to that. That's why.
That's all I have for now. But yeah, can we see if Aqua can?
Yeah, I'm gonna make some phone calls.
Thank you, Bobby, for arranging this. Really good.
Yeah.
Very, very informative.
Yes, and I appreciate Pico coming.
Yeah.
So,
It actually, I don't know, relieved some of my anxiety a little bit about the
Mhm.
energy usage. So I think that's helpful for residents to have this information.
Yeah, I appreciate they came prepared to really
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about this. Like,
Yeah.
really
Well, I'm sure they're
educate
getting
us, so,
these questions from a lot of
yeah,
municipalities.
so, I mean, because they could have come and just given us
Yeah.
but I thought that was very helpful.
Brittany's great. I reached out to her and said, hey, we're doing this. We'd like to have somebody come. And she said, this is absolutely Tom Bonner. He's got a road show already put together. Like, we're prepared for this. And I think they did.
Hopefully Aqua will have their road shows too.
Yes.
Sure.
and I'll just, before we move on to the next item, I just wanted to add, I appreciate that the staff have been quite busy. There's a lot, this is a very trendy, hot topic at the moment, and I know that municipalities all across Pennsylvania and in the region are grappling with how to best handle it from a local government standpoint. I'm hoping that members of the public will watch this presentation and, go through some of these issues with us, and I appreciate the staff. You mentioned this very briefly at the beginning, but many model ordinances have been examined and studied and researched, and we have compiled information from every corner that we can find it in. And I really appreciate that we're casting a wide net and looking deeply into this issue. So thank you, guys.
No, and I'll just have one more comment that I know that the state's also looking at this issue, and there's a question about how model ordinances and et cetera, et cetera. I know Representative Otten has been thinking about this in their own office, and so I don't know if we have any opportunity, or I mean, once I don't want to necessarily get guidance from the Otten office, but it might be helpful to have a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just on the model ordinances, one other thing that we were talking about this morning was
The facade changes, like, so that we don't have a building that's, 500 feet in length, a solid wall, maybe requiring some sort of, like, every 50 feet or something to switch up the facade.
Mural.
So it doesn't look like a prison.
Windows.
It goes a long way. I mean,
Prison like it.
Yeah, right. To make
there's a
sure-
pretty big spectrum of warehouse-sized buildings looking like this and looking like this, and I think it does go a long way to have some type of design standard so that it fits in with the community. And
We don't have that now.
we joke about murals, but it's just a fun way to
It's half joke.
get kids and art and culture involved. Last question, and then we'll move on unless anyone else has a question. What is the anticipated time frame that we hope? I mean, obviously there's a magnitude to this where there's going to be ongoing refinement and amendments, but do we have a time frame that we're hoping to put forth an ordinance?
we have some ideas that I want to talk with Mark about, and then
Great. Anything else from the board?
No.
Okay, nothing for now. To be back to that. All right, moving on to the business meeting agenda review.
so we'll have a recognition of Officer Navarra from the Crime Victim Center for an award she received, an appointment to the Park and Rec Board. We're transitioning a temporary employee into a full-time permanent position on the front desk. We'll be recognizing our achievement of Soul Smart designation and Tara's incredible work on accomplishing that. The couple of resolutions, one around the 2026 tax duplicate, and then another one recognizing April as Pennsylvania 811 Safe Digging Month. We'll have an ordinance, couple of 3 ordinances, one on the Volunteer Emergency Services Tax Rebate Program, one on the Chapter 99 Grass, Trees, Shrubs Amendment, and then one on the Verizon Cable Franchise Agreement Authorization. We didn't talk about this ordinance because we think it's relatively minor, but we'd like to get permission to advertise a key lockbox system ordinance. That is a really fancy way of saying a Knox box and requiring Knox boxes on commercial, industrial, multifamily, and municipal buildings. That allows for emergency responders to access those facilities in a non-destructive manner. And so we'd put an ordinance in place requiring those on those buildings. Right now, we don't have anything requiring them.
We require that, but we don't have an ordinance enforcing it.
Yes. Just cleaning things up. Authorization to participate in a multi-municipal bidding for roadway line painting. We won't have the night vision goggles on there. Authorization to extend the PFM contract and incorporate additional scope of work on the EIT study. And we may also have authorization to enter into a contract for grant writing and administration services. And then just announce that we received a application plan for 675 Peck Road for both preliminary and final land development.
All right, any board questions or comments regarding the meeting agenda? No. All right, I will draw your attention to the announcements at the bottom of the page and open up the meeting to any public comment. Any public comment? All right, with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and we will see everyone on Monday.
Awesome.
It's a long one.
You think I have 8?
I did.
If the 40